Well, welcome everybody to the fourth and final session of the winter series of Theology on Tap. Again, our theme is fraternity and social friendship, and the topic for tonight is the limitations of digital connection versus fraternity. So again, if you have not signed in yet, please do that because it will not only take you to the discussion questions as well as the prayer for tonight, which we will pray very shortly, but also it is the chance for you to possibly win a gift card at the end of the session here. So we have a total of 17 gift cards. So again, if you have not signed in, please do so, and you may have a chance of winning one of those cards. So now then, as I said, we'll pray very shortly here, but of course, just to tell you who we are going to be have the privilege of being talked to tonight. Our speaker is Josh Noem, and just to kind of give a little background about him, he serves as the senior editor for Grotto, which is a digital media network, and it was created specifically for young adults, so yes, our age group. And he grew up in the Black Hills, South Dakota, and began his career in the Catholic press before earning a Master of Divinity, a divinity degree from Notre Dame. And he, from what I heard, just also published his first novel, so called The End of Ending, which is a story about beer, baseball, and love that is stronger than death. So I don't know if that will get you motivated into wanting to read that book, but hey, I was going to say, hopefully something that we can probably read one day, I hope. So, well, anyway, so the presentation, again, it will begin very shortly after we pray, and that should last for about 45 minutes, and at the end of that time, there will be a question and answer format. Again, you can come up here to the center. I will hand you the microphone if you feel comfortable with that, and you can feel free to ask questions to Josh. Okay, so if you guys have not done so already, you can pull up the prayer on the website, and whenever you're all ready, we can go ahead and pray that. Everybody ready? Okay. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Prayer to Saint Joseph, patron of the Universal Church. O most powerful patriarch, Saint Joseph, patron of that universal church, which has always invoked thee in anxieties and tribulations, from the lofty seat of thy glory, lovingly regard the Catholic world. Let it move thy paternal heart to see the mystical spouse of Christ, and his vicar weakened by sorrow, and persecuted by powerful enemies. We beseech thee, by the most bitter suffering thou didst experience on earth, to wipe away in mercy the tears of the revered pontiff, to defend and liberate him, and to intercede with the giver of peace and charity, that every hostile power being overcome and every error being destroyed, the whole church may serve the God of all blessings in perfect liberty. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so thank you for praying, and now we will have Josh come up and give us the talk we're all waiting for.
Thank you for the generous introduction. I'm really excited to be here tonight, so thank you for showing up on a cold evening. I have to apologize first. I was introduced as the editor of Grotto Network, and I was horrified to find that there's a spelling error on the slide, the opening slide up there. It should be an evening. So what happens when the editor doesn't have an editor is the question. We tend to be a little more careful with the other stuff that we publish, so you'll have to forgive me for that. So show of hands. Anybody here who's heard of Grotto? Is this a familiar thing? This is great. Okay. Anybody following us on social media? Outstanding. Okay, that's great. And then I'm also wondering, is anybody here for the first time? Awesome. And if you're here for the first time, are you here because of the Grotto meetup? That's perfect. Awesome. There are a couple other hands back there. Cool. Okay, that's awesome. That's great. Well, this is great. Like I said, I'm really excited to be here. this was a really good confluence of interests for Grotto and for Theology and Tap. We're both in the business of building community and sharing stories, and so I was thrilled to have this invitation to join you. So as we say at Grotto, we're about living boldly, and we need each other for that. So that's why we're really excited to be gathering with you here in person. And because our work in Grotto is with a new media, I've been asked to talk about digital connections, limits, and possibilities. So I'm a storyteller, and my method will be to string together some stories we've told at Grotto and then place some insights in between. But first, I wanted to look at and surface some of your conceptions about digital community. So I have this website set up to record polling. So if you have a phone and can text, I'm going to ask you to text a response to a question. So I'll put the number up here, and we'll see results roll in here in real time. The question is very simple. Has social media, we might need some help here because it's a little too big. The question is, I'll put the number up here anyway so we can figure it out. The question is, has social media been a net positive or a net negative influence in your life? Has social media been a net positive or net negative influence in your life? And you just text the number 1 if it's negative, and text the number 2 if it's positive. And you see the number up there. And as results roll in, are the instructions making sense here? So you just text 1 or 2. Okay. Turn this off. We'll see things starting to roll in. This is great. Okay. So as you vote, you're going to get a text response that has a link to our website. And so just a quick pitch here. If you sign up for Grotto's newsletter tonight, or right now, whatever, we'll send you the stories that I'm sharing here tonight in a newsletter, as well as others. So I had to pick only a couple to share tonight, where there's many more. So if you sign up for this newsletter, we'll send you a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to these stories and others. And to sign up, you just scroll to the very bottom of our webpage, and there's a form at the bottom to put your email in. So if you sign up tonight, we'll know that you were at this event this evening, and then we'll send you something tomorrow, and you'll be in the loop to get our stories every Tuesday. So, pretty even split here. I really wasn't sure how this is going to turn out, so it's fascinating. So overall, a net positive. That's great. The next question then is why? So what were the factors that went through your mind when you're making that assessment and that evaluation? And maybe you could just, if you're fine, just kind of like call them out. What were some of the thoughts that you had about positive or negative? Let's start with maybe negative. What were some of the negative factors that came to mind? Comparison, yeah. Just a loss of time. Yeah, the time suck, yeah. Yeah, distraction, just kind of always being busy in your head, not restful. That's really good. Yeah, right. Yeah, that, I heard, I have a friend who's a priest, and he said, the 11th commandment is that thou shalt not compare, which seems to apply to social media. What were some of the factors that ran through your mind when you thought about social media being a positive influence? Go ahead. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Extends your reach. Yeah. Yeah. Staying in touch. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. New ideas. New stories. It's just more efficient. Right? Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Great. This is awesome. Okay. Yeah, so I understand it was kind of a black and white question here about, I was kind of asking you to pick a side. Yeah, it can be helpful to maybe tease out some nuance. So this is a good starting point, but let's go a little bit deeper. Digital media, just like any other created good, is a neutral force, and the way we use it is what shapes and informs our lives. So let's deepen our assessment. Maybe better questions to ask would be, how to use digital media well? What are the dangers and limits of digital media? And then considering those dangers and limits, what are some correctives we should attend to counterbalance the ways that digital media is shaping us? So those are kind of the three questions we'll walk through tonight that I'm going to throw some stories at, if that's okay. So how to use digital media well, what are the dangers and limits of digital media, and then how can we balance and deepen our lives beyond digital media? Does that make sense? So the first question is how to use digital media well. So at Grotto, we're a digital media company, so we've put all our chips in that basket of, all our eggs in that basket of this being a positive force. We're committed to that idea that these digital connections can be positive force. Pope Francis calls them the new public square. It's a meeting place. It's a place to connect and exchange ideas, to find support, to be inspired, to be moved. And those relationships and connections that we build online, they're real, right? They mean something, but it's also important to keep in mind that they're just they're a subset of human relationships, right? They're not everything. They shouldn't be confused with the fullness of friendship. There's always more available to us in person. Online, we only see one angle of the mystery of the human person. It's real, but it's just one angle. So here's the next. I'm going to play a video here, a video story we shared recently. I got this one. It's okay. About a guy who is streaming Fortnite, and his brother is Ninja, who's like this world-famous gamer. And I'm going to guess that this might be the first time that Fortnite has been streamed in the sanctuary. Just an idea. My guess. Oh, I might need some help because I wasn't sure about how the sizing. Sorry. There we go. Yep, that'll work. Yep.
Jesus, what did he do when he walked around? He went to where people were spending their time. He met people where they were at. Absolute. Yes! Let's go, dude. Swear to me! Movie critics hated Bane as a villain. I thought he depicted evil better than anyone else because there was just no reason for it. Okay, so here's the question, you guys. What is the reason that you watch the stream and why you hang out in this community? Share that now, and I'll read some of the answers. Let's go, dude! Woo! So all that jazz for says, I can't really articulate it, but being here makes me happy, and I feel more optimistic even when I'm stressed from life. It makes me feel like family. What you said about my cousin is amazing. It motivates me to better my own faith. I was brought back to faith. I watched the stream because John is a positive person that... Dude. Okay, I wasn't ready for this, okay? I hear stories like that, but you never know if you're still making a difference, and so that was cool. God is good. Yeah. My brothers and I, we're just super goofy. There was just sometimes it just got contagious and it got out of hand. We're gonna call this the old spot right here. This is probably 50% of the time. Hitting my brothers on both sides, getting moved. My brother is Ninja, literally the most popular streamer on the planet.
I'm super proud of what my older brother does. I'm John's younger brother. I'm super proud of what he's been doing. I hope him all the best, man. He's awesome. It's honestly just really inspiring, and I kind of look to do that same thing as well.
And it was actually in a conversation with him and with his awesome wife, Jess, where they were like, hey, John, you would be good at this too, and you could use it to share Jesus with other people. And I think they know I'm serious. At the end of every stream, I pray for everyone in my stream and for the intentions, and then even ones that aren't listed. And I think they know that and trust that too. And you know what? The Dark Knight Rises, there are people who choose good, and there are people who choose evil, and then there are people who stay in their homes. Those are called moral relativists. The Lord says in Revelation, if you are lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. I'd rather you be hot or cold. And so many people chose nothing in that Batman movie. Man, what a movie. I like to think like ever ancient, ever new. And so now we ask the question, where are people at? And whether you like it or not, many of them are online, watching people play video games. And so the gospel belongs there as well.
There's a llama right here.
I see someone coming, marshmallow. Oh! Let's go! Dude, off of the snowboard, are you kidding me? Somebody clip it.
Off the snow, are you serious?
Off the snowboard, dude, going full
Bro,
blast.
let's get it.
Where is Peter?
Anybody find me?
Oh! Dude, off of the snowboard, are you kidding me? Somebody clip it.
What do you think, Stacy? The first time that Fortnite's been streamed in the sanctuary? That's great. Okay, so what are the virtues on display here? How is this an example of using digital media well? So here's a guy who's using social media to connect with people, right? What do we notice? He's intentional. He's not just floating along and mindlessly consuming. He's reaching out. He's opened himself to other people, to exchanges and dialogue. He's positive. He wants to make a difference in people's lives. And he's supportive. He engages and reaches out and touches people in their brokenness. And he supports them with fellowship and prayer. I love it. It's a good example because it cuts through that facade that we were talking about that often dominates social media, that appearance of connection. It feels like you're connected. Or worse, the appearance of perfection, that curated life where we pick and choose the bright sides of our lives to share, and social media becomes this complicated mask that we wear. So Jonathan counteracts that with self-disclosure. It's appropriate self-disclosure, right? He's not sharing anything that he's not sharing anything he's still working through. But you can tell from the way he talks that he's vulnerable and real, and people see something real about him through that stream, and they're responding to that. That connection means something to them. That connection shouldn't mean everything to somebody, but there is something there. So those are maybe some examples of how to use digital media well. To use it with intentionality, to be outward-oriented, to be positive and supportive, and then to bring some authenticity and appropriate vulnerability to it. And then I'm going to add one more virtue that wasn't touched on in this story, but I think it's important to think about. Actually, I think it's less important to think about what's going out, what you're sharing, and much more important to curate what's coming in, what you're consuming. So for me, that means following friends and platforms and voices that I disagree with a small caveat that if they're thoughtful, no one has any time for crazies or irrational, poor arguments. But just a word of encouragement to go out and find good arguments online and to broaden your perspective. And that takes work because the algorithms want to narrow your focus. They want to feed you things that they know that you like. So those alternative perspectives aren't just going to find you. Okay, so if we can agree that there's some positive potential with digital community, and that seems to be at least something of the majority of you believe that it's an important subset of relationships, but not the totality, then the next question is, what are the dangers and limits of using digital media? And Pope Francis dropped some wisdom here in his recent letter, Fratelli Tutti, and I'm going to put one quote on the screen because it really captures things well. He uses language similar to food, to consuming food, to talk about the expectations and experience of social. I'm going to goof this up again. Here we go. There we go. So he says, we fed ourselves on dreams of splendor and grandeur and ended up consuming distraction, insularity, and solitude. We gorged ourselves on networking and lost the taste of fraternity. We looked for quick and safe results only to find ourselves overwhelmed by impatience and anxiety. Prisoners of a virtual reality, we lost the taste and flavor of the truly real. So as I read that, I thought, what a perfect description of the feeling you have when you've been doom scrolling. You know, I mean, we were talking about this, right? The feeling you have when you've just been scrolling and you realize you've just wasted a half an hour or 45 minutes, whatever. I think that's a really good encapsulation of that feeling. So the dangers he lists here: distraction, insularity, solitude, impatience, anxiety, and then losing a sense of fraternity, a sense of the real. He goes on to talk about losing contact with concrete reality, with getting lost in the digital world. And we've forgotten some of the experience, I think, because of the pandemic. We've lost some of the experience of interpersonal encounter. But we need to remember that value, right? That face-to-face, that's where we give and receive communication in the fullness. That's why we're here. That's why we're here physically in person. Body language, facial expressions, all of that nuances our exchanges. Moments of silence, remember those? Like when you're just having a conversation with somebody and you just like are done talking for a bit. Trembling hands, blushing cheeks, all of that communicates. And digital media tends to flatten those elements out, tends to turn them into just a two-dimensional words and image. You don't get the fullness. Pope Francis has a really good phrase for this. He calls social media, he says social media offers the appearance of sociability. The appearance of sociability. When what's actually happening inside of us, we have this appearance of sociability that is outward focused, when what's actually happening inside of us is an expansion of individualism, where we're creating and consuming this world of our own making. Okay, so Francis also goes on to say, he talks about how we're in danger of becoming deaf as a culture. We're losing the ability to truly encounter and welcome others. And he puts us in the language of listening, that we're losing the ability to listen, which is more than just hearing, right? It's about being fully present with somebody and receiving them. And that's true. It's hard to truly listen attentively, to be single-minded in our conversation. I hope when you leave, and if you end up connecting with others after this event, that's something that you practice. It's such a fundamental skill. Again, not just hearing, but being fully present and having your full mind and attention with somebody. It's such a fundamental skill, but it's something we need to practice over and over and over again. So one of the main dangers, the major critique that Pope Francis offers here, is the control we exercise with digital media. We're occupied with managing our feed. We have this ability to see only what we want and what we value, and we exclude what we can't control or what we disagree with. And the Pope says that this blocks the reflection and dialogue we need for wisdom. He has this simple line, but it's so important. He says, we must not lose our ability to listen. We can't lose our ability to listen. And so he offers four correctives to the way that the digital world shapes our lives. And this is kind of set the trajectory for the rest of the talk here. 4 ways we can increase our ability to listen and be present. And these are all about offline, real person, real life encounters, opportunities that open us up. So the 4 ways that he talks about are all drawn from the life of St. Francis. So St. Francis listened to nature, he listened to the voice of the sick, he listened to the voice of the poor, and he listened to the voice of God. So he listened to nature, the sick, the poor, and to God. So of those 4 things, here's the connection to Grotto, right? We're telling stories digitally, but all with the aim of moving us offline to change our lives and pursue living boldly. And that can only happen when we engage the reality of our lives and our relationships. So what I'm going to propose here is that we dive into some of these stories we've shared digitally, again with the idea that these stories were intended to inspire a new way to see the world, to listen to new voices and new people, with the conviction that just a sliver of somebody's story can call us outside of ourselves and ground us in something real and inspire us to seek something new. So these are stories about expanding horizons, encountering new people, stories about moving us to love. So I'll share 4 stories here, video stories and also written stories, kind of back and forth. And then following each, I'm just going to offer a few lines, connections that I see, and then offer a few questions to help us digest the story. So here's a story about listening to nature. So Stacy, if you wanted to be ready with the other ones, I can prompt you when it's time. That's okay. Can be done with this and this. And then this one. You just did that? Yep. Yeah. Okay. Great.
recycling at its finest. This is mulberry from the fence row that is now cooking our Christmas ham.
I've struggled to explain this to people, but living on a farm and growing things and being outside every day for your job is just, I don't know, it's a different relationship to nature where I'm out in it all day.
Why did I move to Colorado, like in the first place? Well, I always worked at a camp out there when I was in college.
And also, obviously, I love the mountains, so it was pretty easy to just say, after college, let's go to the mountains. Denver's more of my community than Indiana is at this point. I have been living here for about 10 years.
I'm gonna pack this stuff because I just gonna leave my bag up there.
This is the family I've created on my own that I love and, you know, hang out with all the time. So they always knew that the farm in Indiana were something that was really important to me, to be back there and do that. So I don't think they're surprised per se, but I think, you know, they're still then losing part of their community as well. I don't know, I think people are happy for me mostly, but then sad.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandpa died just 1 year ago, so I had quit my job in Denver and already started working here.
We came out here to visit his grandparents, and I'll never forget because his grandpa thought I was so cute because I have dimples, which is a big deal for him.
Having her obviously makes it 100% easier. She doesn't know anybody here, so we're kind of starting over, building a new community together.
Before we even started dating, we both wanted to live on a farm and always had envisioned having kids in space like that.
I feel like that's meaningful to grow up with cousins around and lots of aunts and uncles and grandparents, which is something we just wouldn't have had in Denver. No kids yet, no.
So I chose this story about listening to nature because I love the way Jesse interacted with nature in Colorado and the difference in the way he interacted with it here in Indiana. When he was in Colorado, he loved nature and used it for recreation in the mountains and on the river, right? He's appreciating and recreating. But on his farm, he's in relationship with the land in a different way. The land makes demands of him, and he makes demands of the land, and that's shaping him and his family. So just two quick questions to help us kind of digest this before we move on. One is, where do you connect with nature best? Where do you find yourself immersed in nature the best? And the other question is, how could we better cooperate with nature? How could we better be in relationship with nature? Okay, so listening to nature and then listening to those who are sick. Here's a story I wrote about someone who was listening to those who were sick. It's the end of a long day for Damien, a young man in Hawaii in 1844. He's soaking his feet in a basin of scalding water, but he can't feel anything. And that's when he knows he has leprosy. That's when he knows he will go from serving lepers in the colony of Molokai to becoming one. Damien came to Molokai at the robust age of 33 to help the 700 people there living in quarantine. Before he left the healthy world, people told him to keep his distance. Don't eat with them, they said. Don't get too close. But when he arrived, he saw these people wandering about like ghosts laden with blankets of despair. Native Hawaiians had no natural immunity to any number of diseases carried by the traders and sailors who began arriving on their islands at the start of the 19th century. Illness fell upon these people like sparks on dry tinder. The most feared of all these diseases was leprosy. There was no known cure, and it was thought to be highly contagious. Anyone with a trace of the disease was scooped up in the middle of the night and sent away to a secluded peninsula on Molokai, where they were never heard from again. It was known as the separating sickness. These people, and remember their spouses and parents and cousins and sons and daughters, they were dumped on the island to fend for themselves. They'd been torn from family and neighborhood. They knew they would die an ugly death. Some were abusing themselves or others. It was a living hell. So Damien went there and touched them. He visited every single one of the people living there. He had to start smoking tobacco to avoid gagging at the smell of their rotting flesh. But he bandaged their wounds and washed their crumbling bodies. He built roads, churches, orphanages, water systems, and simple homes to replace the ramshackle lean-tos they were using to keep the rain off their heads as they slept. The first thing he built when he arrived? A fence around the cemetery to keep the pigs and dogs out. He shared life with them. He ate with them and prayed with them and buried them and even passed his pipe around. When he arrived, he didn't know any of these lonely, ugly, sick people. He had no obligation to them beyond the pity called for by common human decency, but he loved them, and that changed everything. And now, here at the end of his long day, with his unfeeling feet in a basin of steaming water, he learns that he will share their death as well. He knows the first thing stolen by the disease is sensation, but it will go on to leave disfigurement and worse. He sees it all with perfect clarity. It's just a matter of time. He has a few years left. So what does he do? He doubles down. He works harder to build more roads and homes. He's on the clock now and has to do everything he can to keep this community going after he's gone. This community is the one thing that's healthy for these people. This community gives hope. He writes a letter home and he says, I would not be cured if the price of the cure was that I must leave the island and give up my work. I am perfectly resigned to my lot. Do not feel sorry for me. This is a man whose life ran on a different motor. He was plugged into something that made him strong in weakness. He walked a path that led beyond death to new and abundant life. He knew how to find hope in despair. Whatever was spinning inside Damien made him not afraid to touch people's suffering. And even though he couldn't cure their disease, he healed them. Maybe we can walk that path too. Maybe we can touch people who suffer. Maybe we can search for what he found. So here's what I love about St. Damien's story. He was fearless in the face of illness, even his own terminal diagnosis, and he refused to let sickness get in the way of human dignity. Somehow, that dignity shone even brighter for him when people were sick. And when he saw that in somebody, he tended that flame, right? He kept it burning. So a few questions to help us digest here. Who do you know who's sick? Who do you know who's sick, and how is illness robbing them of their dignity? And how can you restore some of that dignity, even with a small gesture? Okay, here's a story, one more video. Here's a story about listening to the poor. It's about a woman who gives free haircuts to those who are experiencing homelessness, but it has a twist.
This one?
Yep, that's it.
I handle them and I deal with them like they're my family, because they are. I'm that one person that's gonna touch them and give them some exchange of human contact. You come in here and you get one of the best haircuts you've ever had. You have this asset now. You leave here with some asset. I hope that they would go out, find the job, find the respect, take care of the family, and move on. There is so much loneliness. And at the end of the day, they just want to go home with their family. And that's what I wish for them, because I go home to mine and I wouldn't change it for the world. I'll be there tomorrow. Thank you. My mom she was mentally ill all her life. So she was homeless. She died last July, from a drug overdose. And she died right in the street is where they found her. Okay, so here's a picture of my dad. And then here's a picture of my mom. I feel like I'm in a time machine, able to deal with my mom's spirit in some kind of way. Like, my mom didn't get this because I wasn't here to do it for her. So I feel like I'm connecting with her spirit to some way. I don't know what brought me here. I know why I'm staying, so I'll take whatever comes with it, and it's a lot. You know that there's nowhere for them to go. And sometimes just laying in my bed, I can't stop thinking about some of the kids out there who just don't have a choice in it, Some people make choices and some people who don't make them, this is the cards they've been dealt. Just having a mother who lived on the street like that, just no one would come near her, would even shake her hand or even give her a hug or anything like that. And that's what I'm here for.
So here's what I love about this story. Danny has a big heart, obviously, but her service comes out of her own poverty, her own brokenness. She's engaging her story in a deep way when she helps people in need. And then there's the part two on the surface. I think it might be easy for us to imagine her thinking, these people have much bigger needs than a haircut. I'm just a hairstylist, what can I do? But she gives us what she has, right? She offers what she has. And that means something to them, and it means something to her. So a few questions, just to help us break this open a little. What kind of brokenness is part of your story? And then how could that brokenness be shared with others? And what do you have that could be offered to people in need? Okay, one last story. Here's a story about listening to the voice of God. Confession, this isn't actually a Grotto story. It was written by Brian Doyle. And I've adopted a life mission to become a Brian Doyle evangelist. Has anybody heard of Brian Doyle, the writer? Oh, good. You all are going to hear about him for the first time. So exciting. We worked together at the University of Portland for a time. Brian died of a brain tumor in 2017. And it's my conviction that the words Catholic and writing shouldn't be used in the same sentence without Brian Doyle. His writing is unique, and it set a tone for the kinds of stories that we're gathering at Grotto. So I recommend him to you enthusiastically. This is from a collection of one of the collections of his essays called One Long River of Song. I know in the introduction it was said that I have a novel out there, but if there's one book you buy after this evening, let it be this one. This is the one. Brian's writing will change your life. So this is a story called God Again. I had a brief chat with God the other day. This was at the United States Post Office. God was manning the counter from 1 to 5, as he does every blessed day. He actually says every blessed day, and he means it. You never saw a more patient being. He never loses his cool, and believe me, he could. I would. I've been in line behind crazies at his window and heard vituperative abuse and vulgar character assassination and scurrilous insinuation, and never once did I witness any flash of temper in response to this on his part. I have asked him how he could maintain his cool, and he says things like, I try to put myself in their position, and witnessing vented emotion is part of the job, and all storms blow over, and it's only frustration, and there are so many much more serious things, and we are all neighbors in the end. I am impressed by these sentiments, in large part because I share them consistently in theory, but inconsistently in practice. God, however, does not waver, nor does he fluctuate in his equanimity. He stands there quietly as people bang their fists on his counter and offer rude remarks and stomp away muttering darkly. He does not smile when someone gets upset. He says he has learned that some people get more upset if you smile when they're upset. He listens to what they say, and often, I notice, he makes a note on a pad as they leave. He says, I make a note if I think they have a good point we should discuss with management. Often what is couched as a complaint is actually a good point about how we could be of better service. He remembers pretty much every regular who comes to his window, and he greets them politely by name. Sometimes he will inquire after children and animals. Dogs adore God and will sometimes rear up on his counter to see him better. He greets them politely by name surprisingly often. He says, I would guess I know 100 dogs by name. Hardly any cats. People don't take their cats with them when they go to the post office. I make a joke about how cats are the children of Lucifer, and he does not smile. And I realize later that probably Lucifer is still a deeply sad and touchy subject for him. How would you feel if one of your best friends, one of your most trusted companions, tried to steal everything you had and were and did, and for this breathtaking betrayal, he was cast shrieking into the darkness, no longer the shining one, the morning star, but the very essence of squirming, withered despair until the end of time? Wouldn't you be haunted and sad about that ever after? I would. I felt bad and told God I was sorry about making a stupid joke. I said, I make stupid jokes all the time, even though I was now an older citizen and ought to have learned by now not to be so flippant. And God said, no worries. And better a poor joke than something worse. And do you want to use the book rate for your package, which will save you about $5? And I said, yes, sir, and thank you, and walked out of the post office thinking that if we cannot see God in the vessels into which the electricity of astonishing life is poured by a profligate creation, vessels like this wonderfully and eternally gracious gentleman at the post office, then we are very bad at the religion we claim to practice, which says forthrightly that God is everywhere available, if only we remove the beam from our eyes and bow in humility and gratitude for the miraculous, which falleth even as the light from the sun, which touches all things and is withheld from none. So it is that I have seen God at the United States Post Office and spoken to him and been edified and elevated by his grace, which slakes all those who thirst, which is each of us, which is all of us. Here's what I love about this story. Brian takes something very ordinary. He does this in almost all of his stories. He takes something very ordinary and helps us see it in a new light. And then we come to see that it's actually extraordinary, that it's full of grace and possibility, and that its beauty is just one of a gajillion ways God is reaching out to us. So, 2 questions. Brian writes that God is everywhere available. So, where have you encountered God in the past week? Outside of this building, where have you encountered God this week? Brian also writes that we are vessels into which the electricity of astonishing life is poured by a profligate creation. So who in your life reveals to you the electricity of astonishing life? So I'll leave you here with these stories. Just to note, in a week we're headed into Lent. These are some good examples, I think, for renewal as we seek to reshape our lives in this Lenten season. Another reminder, sign up for a newsletter at grottonetwork.com at the bottom of the page so I can send you these stories and some others. And then you've got Mardi Gras next week too, right? So come back next week. And then we've got time for questions and answers. Yeah? I'm open for questions. Thank you for your attention. This has been really fun to share the stories with you. Thanks.
If you were here last week, remember you have to talk really close to the mic, but you don't have to eat it.
Does the microphone help if people are streaming maybe? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, okay. Great. Any questions? Questions about writing, about Grotto, social media? Open to anything. My major as an undergrad was a great book seminar, which is dependent on, the whole idea was participation in class, right, conversation. And there were stories told of a professor in the old days. He would start class and then ask a question to get the conversation going. If nobody answered, he would just stand up and go stand by the window and light his pipe and just start smoking his pipe until somebody said something. It's great. I'm not going to do that to you, so.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me through this.
Go ahead.
So I also work in Catholic media, and as someone who works in it all the time, do you have any advice for the balance between this is what I do, and I have to, continue growing the media that I'm working in, but also not getting exhausted all the time yourself? How do you manage that?
That's a great question. Yeah, if you work in media, it's your life. It's everything. You spend your workday on it, and then you go home, and if you have any social media presence or whatever, it's just sometimes it feels like this is what I do now. This is who I am. I'm on this all the time. Our whole team is like that. We've got a team of 11 folks at Grotto, all creatives, and we try to pay really close attention to work-life balance and being disciplined about that, so that we make sure that there's times when we can step away and we're just unplugged. We've got a social media manager, and that person she's on our social media, all the time, right? By necessity. She's like part of the conversation. And so, we draw lines, so there's certain hours of the day after work when it's like, okay, she's off that, and she'll be back in the morning, and that'll be that. Christmas, for example, is another one. We had a good Christmas break, and we're like, okay, let's split things up so that we each have a week off or whatever, So those kinds of lines are really important for well-being and health, I think. The other thing that comes to mind is just trying to be a part of a healthy conversation online. A lot of that's outside of your control with the people who engage. I shared something recently, really personal on Grotto. I had COVID in January and got pretty sick. So I just wrote a letter to anybody else who's sick to kind of share the experience. And the post then went up on Facebook, and then there were a lot of I was just really humbled by the response from friends and family and folks who were checking in on me. But there were also a couple comments on on our Facebook post that was kind of like, I was like, I don't want to respond to that, but I feel like I have to. And I just kind of noticed that dialogue happening in my mind, and like I was like, I just gotta let it go. Like there's some people out there you're not going to touch. Engaging further is going to just deepen that hole that you're digging. And so I don't know what discipline that is. Maybe just picking your battles. This is something I'm sure you know. Being careful about what you wade into. Yeah, and then like I said, making sure there's positive sources, that we're connecting to voices that are uplifting and healthy and part of the direction of life that we want to go to. And that's what we hope Grotto serves that function for you too. So thanks for the question.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So first off, I just wanted to thank you for reminding us that social media is a neutral thing.
Yeah.
And I actually voted that it's a positive influence in my life, reflecting on the whole. And so you put the words to like where my thoughts were going. It's a matter of how you use it. And
Yeah.
so, and then I also kind of think, I just had this discussion with my mom the other night. So my family, I feel like, is not very aware of all of the dangers that just internet usage for young children can bring.
Yeah.
And so I think of some platforms like Snapchat, I feel like is pretty unsafe for most people.
Yeah.
So at what point do you say, like, this is something that you want to bring light to and you want to be a positive influence in? And at what point do you decide to cut it out in your life? And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's different case to case and person
Yep.
to person.
Yep, really good question. So just to repeat the question, with social media, I mean, there was a substantial split between positive and negative. So there's obviously influences, right, both ways. So the question was, where do you draw the line? You know, where do you draw the line between investing in a presence, a platform, or an account, and then at what point do you just pull the plug and realize that this is not a place for me, or a place to make an impact, or something that's healthy? So I'll answer it. Two things come to mind. One is I'm a parent myself, so 3 kids. My oldest is a sophomore in college, and my youngest is an 8th grader. And we've steered pretty clear of social media for them. And it's interesting too, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens in social media in the next 10 years. The younger generations, Gen Z, tend to be a little more hands-off with that, and they're not, it doesn't seem to be in any rush, or they're very selective about what they engage. So we'll see. But that's been a decision for us as parents, is to not prompted, there's not been any rush. We haven't feel like we need to like get them introduced into this world. It'll be there when they're ready for it, and there's not really been any interest. They've been much more interested in connecting with their friends in person. My oldest, who's in college now, has an Instagram account, a Twitter account, and I only found out about it because some of my friends were following us. You know, it's one of those things you find out about secondhand. But we have those conversations now that he's kind of wading into that water and talking about staying safe. And then, you know, for yourself, for your own use, I think that this is an area of discernment for people. And I think it's something you really need to take seriously. You know, it just takes introspection. And that's the hard thing, I think. If you get too immersed in social media, it steals that quiet, and we were talking about this, it steals that quiet reflection time and space in your mind. If it just becomes a reflective habit, that this is where you're kind of turning to when you roll over in the morning first thing, or when you're going to sleep or whatever, you lose those in-between times. The ability to be bored is so important. It's important for kids. It's important for adults too, to have time to daydream, you know, and to be driving in the car, or walking between buildings or whatever, and just space to let your mind wander. Like, there's so much processing and attentiveness that happens during those times. And it's not just attending to the world outside, it's attending to this world inside. So you need to give yourself space for that. I think that's one thing we need to pay attention to when we're using social media, is making sure that it's a hungry beast. Like, it'll take as much as you allow it to take. So making sure that you're disciplined about time and space that you give it. And then using that time and space, maybe regularly, to think about, is this making my life better? Like, kind of pay attention to yourself, as you're using these platforms. Am I becoming an angry person? Like, how would you know if you're becoming an angry person? Like, that's kind of like, the old question about frog in the boiling water, right? It's like, frog gets in the water when it's cold, and then after 10 minutes it's boiling, but at what point does the frog realize it's boiling? Yeah, that just kind of vigilance about, what is this doing to me? Some of that happens in conversation with other people. I think bringing this up with friends and family to say, what do you notice about me in the last year or whatever? I've been using Instagram. What do you follow me? What do you notice about my voice? Or just getting some feedback and starting a conversation can be a good starting point. Yeah, but really a lot of that conversation, that reflection, happens in those quiet moments. Journaling can help, prayer can help. Any way you can kind of get a perspective on yourself, to track where you're at and how this is nudging you. Where's it moving to you? Yeah, I know people who, Twitter is kind of my platform of choice. I know people who said, I do Twitter for 5 minutes at 8 o'clock, from 8 to 8:05 p.m., and that's it. Like, I think that's really healthy. I think that's great. Yeah, and I know people too who've gone on fasts from social media. I think that's really helpful to just like explore what's life like without this presence in my life. If that's during Lent or otherwise, I think that's a really good thing. It just like reminds you, oh yeah, after a week or two, you're like, I didn't miss that. or maybe there are connections that you miss. Maybe there's conversations that you miss. So find ways to get perspective, I think, is kind of the short answer to the question. It's a good question. I think we all need to ask it.
Thanks for your points tonight. One of the things I really like about the church is just how universal it is. All the different types of people that sit around you in the pews. So I was just kind of wondering, how do you get your point across? How do you connect others? And kind of cast as wide of a net as possible, just because there's a lot of different viewpoints out there in the church.
And are you speaking about Grotto as a platform? Or? Yeah. Good question. Yeah, so the question is, how does Grotto kind of cast a wide net and reach people? What do you think? So Grotto was launched with this idea that there's a real need in these Gen Z and millennial generations for connection, and people are really seeking connection and community. There's that conviction, and then also the conviction that there is this new media, and we need to put these two things together. So we've been always trying to kind of like expand and grow our audience. We're just always looking to bring more people into conversation with one another. There's technical ways we do that in terms of advertising and being careful about social media and trying to kind of ride the wave of kind of what's current, right? And like there's certain dialects and forms that communication takes in social media, and so we're always trying to make sure we're nabbing what's latest, so we're kind of speaking to those trends. So that's kind of there's the technical aspect of it, which is about the form, but I think really what our voice really comes down to with Grotto, it's about depth. We're always trying to tell stories that illuminate the interior life, that are really rooted in a deeply human experience. So on the one hand, there's kind of like the flashy, let's make sure we've got good design on our Instagram page and that our grid looks good. Like that's important, we get that. But if there's not substance behind that, then that rings a little shallow. And so our effort really is trying to find unique voices for the people that we bring into our freelancer community, who are telling interesting stories, who can go to kind of really deep places in their lives and bring fresh insights to experiences. And our conviction, and I think that's carving kind of a unique space for us with the voice that we're sharing. And when you kind of differentiate yourself with that, then people know that they can return to it. They trust it, right? So our focus in storytelling is just consistent quality and depth, trying to invite people to more, and finding people who can tell good stories. Does that touch on what you're getting at? Yeah? That's great. Thanks.
So my question is related to the people who have sort of responded to some of like the filtering we've seen on different social media platforms. People will post things like, join me in like closing your Facebook account and switch over to MeWe or Parler or whatever. What would your response be to like somebody who's like, oh, let's abandon this platform or like use something different because we're being filtered?
Yeah. Real questions around free speech on some of these platforms, right? Yeah, that's a good question. I guess my mind goes back to the advice I was offering about finding good arguments, that there shouldn't be any reason to run from a good argument, right? Actually, we should be going out and finding them. We should be looking for alternative perspectives. So the idea that, this platform or whatever isn't respecting our community or we need to go somewhere else, that kind of like instinct to become an enclave, like to reinforce a bubble, like social media does that for you already. Like that's happening without us thinking about it. Like that's what they're doing. That's what's happening in these platforms. They're just keep feeding you what they know you're responding to. So like our effort should be to expand that, break beyond that. And I guess my opinion would be fleeing from these platforms to find other like-minded people. Yeah, that's a little, I think that's dangerous because it becomes an echo chamber. Yeah, I've been really edified by conversations I've had. There's several friends who come to mind who are very different from me politically. But I'll find a thoughtful argument or an interesting article that makes a point that resonates with me, and then I'll make a point of reaching out and sharing it with them, right? And saying, I found this interesting. Or there's several friends, maybe there's a group of 4 or 5 of us, and just to share something to say, I found this insightful, but they'll bite back and say, that's good, but let's look at this. Or they'll say, here's some other arguments that maybe take a different angle. Like, that exchange doesn't happen every day. It's maybe something, we have an exchange like that once a month maybe, but they have different convictions, and that's really broadened my perspective, and it's also, I think, made me a better interlocutor. Like, it makes me kind of like cut to the chase of what's really at the bottom of my own arguments, and what's maybe fluff. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess my thought of that is just to make sure that you're pushing that bubble out as much as you can, including others. Again, with the caveat that just be careful what you're inviting in, because not everything should come into the bubble. But yeah, finding good sources, sources that you trust, places that make good arguments. It's important. Yeah. Other questions?
Okay, can everybody hear me again? All right, perfect. Well, don't mean to cut anybody else off that may have had some questions, but for time's sake, we'll just go ahead and try to wrap it up. So just want to say thank you again to Josh for being here, for the wonderful things you've shared with us. It definitely is some great food for thought. So again, we just really appreciate you being here and just everything that you've just given us to think about. So
it's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for the invitation. Really nice to join you.